What's going on, guys? I'm Dre from GoJetTech, and today I've managed to get my hands on something I've been waiting for a while now. The brand new 8BitDo Ultimate 2 wireless controller. I've been using the original Ultimate controller for a while now for all my couch gaming, and it quickly became my favorites, beating out both the DualSense and Xbox controllers. But now, since I have the original and the sequel, let's take a deeper look and see if the upgrade is really worth it. First off here, the unboxing is pretty much exactly the same. Inside we have the all-important controller and charging base, a USB A to C cable, some paper with some words on it, and inside the base we have the 2.4 GHz receiver for the controller. But who cares about the unboxing since you only have to do that once? How does it actually feel in hand? And wow, the changes that they have made between the original Ultimate and this one aren't all that significant, but it feels so good in hand. The first thing I noticed between the original and this one is that the contouring of the handle parts is slightly thinner through the grip, which makes it sit more comfortably in my hand. It wasn't something that bothered me in the past with the original, but having the A-B comparison, I definitely prefer the hand feel of the Ultimate 2. Another thing to go along with that is the stipple grip has changed from the original. The new grip is much finer and closer together, which leads to a smoother feel in the hand, while still being grippy enough that it doesn't feel like the controller will slip out of your hands. The proportions here continue on from the Ultimate. Everything is perfectly sized and at a good distance to make it extremely ergonomic to use. Before I go too far into talking about the buttons and triggers and those sorts of things, we need to talk about some of the specs, since that will inform a lot of the feel. First off is connectivity, which is everything you would want when it comes to a controller. So that just involves a 2.4 gig connection and Bluetooth, and you can also connect it directly to your computer or Android device through the USB-C cable. An important fact to note here is that the 2.4 gig connection has actually now been upgraded from a 125 Hz polling rate to now a whopping 1000 Hz. The triggers themselves hold a pretty massive upgrade. They are now Hall effect, but not only that, we also have a toggle on the back to switch the triggers from linear to a non-linear tactile click. The bumpers are now a tactile micro switch instead of silicone membrane. The joysticks are now TMR sensing rather than the Hall effect, which isn't a new technology but has recently been adopted for controllers, and for good reason too. They're essentially a more precise, more power efficient sensor like potentiometers, while also maintaining the longevity that comes from the magnets of Hall effect. So basically just better in every way. The joysticks also now include a wear-resistant metal ring, which doubles as a reflective surface for the next edition, some RGB LEDs around the joysticks. The additional back paddles are also still included, but we also now have a satisfyingly clicky addition of R4 and L4 buttons on the back, nestled in between the bumpers and triggers. As well, in the way of control, there is now 6-axis gyro included as well. There's also been a small change that the 2.4 gig adapter now has a USB-C interface rather than USB-A. And finally, we have a new software version to use with the controller. Now that all the boring technical stuff is out of the way, we can actually talk about the feel and how it is to actually use the Ultimate 2. And well, looks can be deceiving. At first glance, just looking at the two controllers side by side, you don't really notice any differences. But that all changes when you actually start using the controller. 8BitDo took an already great product and iterated and improved upon almost everything, while still maintaining the things that made it great in the first place. So where do I start? Let's begin by having a look at the things that are immediately different. On the face of the controller, if you have a keen eye, it's pretty simple to spot. We have a new orientation for the start and select buttons that now follow this V shape. So in addition to start and select, we also have the 8BitDo menu, or the Xbox button, that stayed in place. But now we have a square and star button. The star is what's used to change your RGB mode, which we'll come back to in a moment when we talk about the functionality. And the square button, which is used to map your back paddles and your new extra bumpers. All of these buttons are micro switched, so they have a really nice click. I should also mention that the start and select buttons are actually domed, which makes feeling them out a bit easier, since due to the new positioning, I actually found myself constantly misclicking the square and star buttons, which was slightly annoying. Moving on from them to the more important buttons, we have the face buttons, which have stayed very much the same and feel almost identical to the previous generation. As far as I can tell, they're maybe slightly softer, but still feel super satisfying to press. Which might be a little bit of confirmation bias, but since the older one has obviously been used a bit more, these do still feel a bit softer. Next up is the joysticks, which even though they are now using a newer technology, still feel very similar. What has changed with them though is the rubber on the thumb grip of the joystick, which feels more durable. It has a nice satin finish and feels more premium somehow. Another minor change here is the anti-wear rings on the stalk of the joysticks, which makes doing full spins around the circumference feel like sliding on glass. Now, the biggest change that happened on the face of the controller has actually happened underneath the D-pad, which is now no longer a silicon membrane interface and is now a dampened micro switch instead, and wow. At first reading the change, I didn't think I would enjoy it that much since I was already a fan of the D-pad on the original, but this new one feels extremely good. It's a very reminiscent feeling to the D-pad of the Retroid Pocket 5, which happens to be one of my favorite handhelds. Since it's now a micro switch, you get positive feedback when you press a direction, meaning you get way less accidental diagonals, or on the chance you do happen to press a diagonal, you'll feel the two switches being pressed. Now, the easiest way to explain this is actually by doing the Contra test. I'm just at the beginning of the game, and all I'm gonna do is hold down on the D-pad to get into a prone and wiggle the D-pad left and right. What you should see happen here is that the character doesn't move, but this will take me to the next favorite part of the D-pad, which is the pivot. While pressing a diagonal on accident isn't easy, you do want it to be relatively easy to do by rolling your thumb, which will make doing things like fireballs and Street Fighter a lot easier. So back in Contra, I'm going to do the same test again, but instead of wiggling, I'm going to intentionally try to get my character to move, which, as you can see, is really super easy to get him to go left and right without ever actually having to touch the left and right on the D-pad. So as my mate Russ over in Hawaii would say, this D-pad is very Hadoukenable and Shoryukenable. I'm kind of gushing, I know, but I just want you to know how good this D-pad feels. Something to mention though about the micro switch is that it's not a sharp click that you get at all. I'm not sure what they've done under the hood, but it's dampened somewhat, which leads to a really nice soft click. That's enough of the face of the controller though, so let's move on to the top and look at the bumpers and triggers, which have some nice improvements. Looking straight on at the top of the controller, one of the first things that will pop out at you is the extra bumper buttons that are nestled in nice and cozy there. These are programmable to function as any other button or combination of buttons and have an extremely satisfying micro switch click when you press them in. The left and right bumpers have now also been changed to micro switches instead of the silicon membrane of old. I feel like that decision there might be one of the more criticized by the community of 8BitDo, since there's not an insignificant amount of people out there that don't actually enjoy the clickiness of micro switches. But I for one love the feel of the new bumpers. I should quickly mention that the pairing button is included, as well as these two indentations that are used for the mobile phone clip to be attached, which I don't have on hand to test, and honestly probably not something that I would use, but hey, it's there. Moving on from those, we have the all-important triggers, which have been upgraded to Hall effect, and they honestly feel smoother than the original, but again, that might just be a little confirmation bias since the newer controller has had significantly less use. As well as being upgraded to Hall effect, we now have a physical switch on the back of the controller to update it into the current controller landscape of finally being able to turn your linear triggers into a shorter travel click, which is a thing, I guess. In fairness though, it does make a lot of sense for shooter games wanting a quicker reaction to shoot or aim down sights, or having the option for the analog linear input as well for racing games so that you have that more granular input. Finally, since we're looking at the back, we have the other mappable buttons on the controller with these paddles, which feel extremely similar, though to the hand they protrude less from the base controller itself, so they're less noticeable in hand. But with that, I feel like they're thinner and lead to a slightly higher pitch click, but functionally they're exactly the same, if not incrementally more comfortable. Next we have the switch to change our modes between 2.4 gig and Bluetooth, and finally the contacts for the charging dock. Since I've mentioned the charging dock, I should say that it's exactly the same. I did not notice any difference other than the fact that the receiver is now USB-C. Knowing how the controller feels is all well and good, but none of that matters if it doesn't do what it says it does. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. Now, the first thing I want to mention is that I absolutely love this controller. It's incredibly easy to use and doesn't really have any hoops to jump through to be able to use it, which is exactly what you want. The software on a computer is fully serviceable and helpful if you want to set up multiple profiles or macros on your controller. You can also be very specific on how you want your RGB LEDs to be set up. It runs well, and I didn't run into any hiccups with it in my quick test, but honestly, I didn't really spend enough time with it to speak too authoritatively, since that's just not how I want to interact with a controller. So how do I interact with a controller? Well, I just use it. Connecting it via 2.5 gig or Bluetooth is extremely easy and straightforward. In my experience, it connects much faster over the 2.5 gig signal than its predecessor, and is as close to instant wake up and connection as you can get. Likewise, connecting Bluetooth is as easy as switching it over on the back, holding the pairing button and connecting it on whichever device you're planning on using it on. Keep in mind that Bluetooth as a whole is a slower connection, and you might notice some input lag if you're someone that is sensitive to it. But in my experience, I didn't notice any, but that comes with the caveat that I was playing some retro games where having instant inputs isn't that important. And then once you're connected, the experience is pretty well flawless. I haven't run into any issues with input lag, wrong inputs, or disconnecting. The battery life is more than long enough to last those longer sessions, and I haven't found myself having to charge the controller mid-gaming. But my sessions tend to be in the 3 to 4 hour mark at the very longest. Changing LED modes on the fly is easy too by pressing the star button, cycling from light tracing mode to firing mode, as 8BitDo calls it, which has this rotating red fire-like effect, a solid color, and then finally fully off. All of these modes can be customized lightly with button combos on the controller, where you can change the color and brightness, and in the case of the firing, you can change the rate of the rotation. The final feature I want to talk about is the on-the-fly button mapping of the back paddles and extra bumpers. To begin with, I had no idea how this works, since I couldn't find any obvious documentation on it, and I happened to had already lost the manual that came in the box. So after some searching online, I found it on the 8BitDo website in a spot that was retrospectively pretty obvious. But just in case you're like me and you tend to throw out those useless bits of paper, I'm going to link it down below just in case. The process is actually super straightforward though once you kind of know how. The easiest way to do it, in my opinion, which isn't actually diagrammed too well in the manual, is to hold the paddle or the bumper you want to mount, and then the face button or combination of those buttons at the same time, and then just tap the square button. After that, you'll know if you mapped it correctly, because the little LED in the middle of the controller will flash quickly when you hold the paddle or bumper that you've mapped. So, should you run out and immediately upgrade to the Ultimate 2? Well, maybe. I think this controller ticked enough boxes of the things that I like to warrant the upgrade, but if you're someone who isn't a huge fan of clicky micro switches, or you don't want a toggle for your triggers, then it's pretty safe to skip this one. But if you're someone who enjoys clicky buttons, wants options for your triggers, or you want that all-important 1000Hz polling rate for less input lag over that 2.5 gig, this one's kinda hard to say no to. I should also add that since the writing of this video, 8BitDo have released an Ultimate 2 Bluetooth controller, which is not at all confusing since both this one and the new one offer Bluetooth connection. But it seems the newer one was made with Switch compatibility in mind, whereas the Ultimate 2 wasn't, and I unfortunately no longer own a Nintendo Switch to test if I can connect my one to it or not. But if that's something that's important to you, or if you just plan on connecting it to your PC or handheld, then I wouldn't stress. And that's about all I have to say on this controller. I love it. This video ended up being a bit longer than I originally thought it would be, but if you made it to this part of the video, thank you so much, and I appreciate you. And since you made it far, make sure you like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, comment if there's anything I missed or glossed over that you want some more detail on, and make sure you stay beautiful, and I'll catch you all on the next one.